So before we begin, it's kind of obvious from this episode. You will see from the title that we're going to be talking about fasting today. We do want to issue just a trigger warning because although you know that you're about to listen to an episode about fasting, Steph and I, we do go into details on our own experience of fasting and also the ups and downs of fasting. And it has the potential to be a bit of a triggering episode, Steph. And we don't want to censor ourselves too much either, but also we're mindful that it could create some feelings in people.
Yeah. So if you're feeling any vulnerability about being pulled into a conversation like that or ideas about fasting and you're still maybe in the process of fasting or on the fence about it, this might be an episode to skip.
Yes. And although we say this at the end, I think it's important to say at the beginning that if you have a history of eating disorders or disordered eating, or even in that diet binge struggle, fasting is likely, how do I put this? Don't do it.
Just say no.
Just
fasting is a huge trigger for disordered eating and eating disorders.
Yes. Despite, even if there are potential, well, I think there probably are potential physical benefits. You know, our health is not just physical, it's mental and psychological as well. But we hope you enjoy the episode and find it useful. Hello and welcome to the Life After Diets podcast. I'm Sarah Dosanjh, psychotherapist and author of the book, I Can't Stop Eating.
And I'm Stephanie Michelle, binge recovery health coach. If you feel out of control around food, we get it because we've been there.
Thank you for joining our conversations about how to make peace with food and feel more comfortable in our bodies.
Now on to this week's episode.
Hi, Steph.
Hey there.
So we're kind of talking about the same thing, but kind of talking about different things today, I think. Because you're going to be talking about fasting and I'm going to be talking about fasting.
We could switch. I'll talk about fasting.
Okay.
I can't even
and
say
I'll
it correctly.
Fast. When I say fasting, I just sound like a northern Brit. They'd say fasting in the north of the UK.
They would?
Yeah.
See, I don't know.
It's a southern thing to say fasting, to just whack
fasting.
Bath.
Yeah.
It's not a bath. But I think we'll be able to understand each other. We've been working together long enough now. I can understand.
We have subtitles anyway. I put captions on the reels.
Yeah. And I can understand your funny voice, so it's fine.
Oh, I like the idea of me having a funny voice. I like this topic because this was I was so hook, line, and sinker for this. This was like my MO.
Yeah.
Conceptually, like from the wellness perspective and also just from the diet culture perspective, which they're very, they overlap. But this, oh gosh, it is such a compelling approach with the way it's talked about right now. And also it's such a good lens into black and white thinking. Like it works so well with black and white thinking. It's so appealing. And it is so destructive for binge eaters. Like it is, of all the things that made my binge eating worse, fasting was, it was between fasting and keto, but it was fasting. Fasting ignited my fear center in my brain from like that, like hunger perspective to the degrees that I think without it, I don't think I would have recovered because that's how bad it had to get for me to be like, this is absolutely unsustainable. This is horrid. And that was the lowest low of my binge restrict cycle. And I think that was actually what propelled me to be like, I can't do this anymore.
The first time I ever fasted, I think I was about 11. Yeah, well, it was, so a couple of times I can remember as a kid, like one, when I kept being sick whenever I ate. So the doctor was like, don't let her eat anything for a day. So I didn't eat anything for a day. And the other times, a couple of times, quite young, I fasted for religious reasons. Because it's going to be worth touching that because, lots of religions, there's that thread of fasting as well. You've got the wellness thread, you've got the religious thread. Yeah, I'd had that experience. So I was used to people fasting and it not being a big deal and it not being about weight and it not being about health, but about it being this... I remember once praying and fasting for something that I wanted to happen and it didn't happen. And I remember saying to my mom, like, but I prayed and fasted about this thing. And she said to me, fasting isn't a way to try and twist God's arm into doing something. And I kind of thought, well, why are we doing it then? Like, I don't quite understand. It's something about showing commitment. I'm not 100% sure. I mean, I don't have those kind of religious beliefs anymore. And this was a Christian household that I grew up in.
Yeah.
So for me, it wasn't such a strange thing, this concept, when people started talking about it.
Well, there's a reward that's meant to come from these sacrifices. Isn't that the point? I mean, for me, I was brought up in a Catholic household, and Lent was the place. I mean, that's what I'm thinking of as Lent. My grandfather, who had nothing to do with diet culture, sweetest man in the whole wide world. I miss him so much. He was so very religious, and he would fast every day of Lent, and he would break the fast for dinner. And he was so committed to that. And I don't think he did it for a reward. I think that he did it for, like, to show, to be like, I can, because my grandpa loved to eat. Like, my grandma was the best cook. So it was a sacrifice. The thing is, my grandmother, who was not devout, like he went to church every Sunday his entire life, and she did not go with him. But she was diet culture, right? So my grandmother dieted until she passed away just a few years ago, and she was in her 90s. And she would fast with him to lose weight. And she admitted that. I mean, she just used it as, and that's what I remember doing. So I never was able to replicate what my grandfather was doing. But I remember, like, I would use religious sacrifice as a way to, like, rein myself in. You know what I mean? It wasn't about the religious meaning of it, but there is this idea that I think underneath it from the religious point of view is, if you do this thing, you're showing your commitment, and you will be rewarded. Like, it's your penance in some way. And so there is a tie-in of, food and reward, and what I mean, or punishment even, or of like a morality to food that is, this extends beyond diet culture's tendrils, right? So there is maybe some kind of inherent idea about food being a moral thing.
Well, it also, when you talked about the reward, it made me think of in 2010, 2011, when I was earnestly trying to fast and do longer fasts, because I was finding all these YouTube videos where people were talking about water fasts and juice fasts. And they talked about this idea of nirvana, that you reach this somewhat altered state of consciousness, of bliss and peace. Which I haven't heard it spoken about this way for years. I hear it talked about much more in the wellness and health spaces. But that was what I was clinging on to at the time as well. Was like, okay, if I do this thing, one, obviously I'll lose weight. I will reset. I used to think it was the thing I needed to do to reset my relationship with food. Like, I say that now, and it's like, what? Knowing what I know now on the other side of it. But at the time, I was like, this is how I heal this. This is a healing thing to do. I'll reach this state of nirvana. I'll come out of it gently, and like everything will be okay. So that was the other reward side of it that came to mind when you were talking about getting a reward from it.
I felt that. So I would say I probably tried to fast for diet culture reasons prior, and those efforts never really lasted too long. But when I got into wellness in 2014, 2015, I had developed these symptoms that were undiagnosed. Nobody knew what was going on. I thought I was dying. I thought I had every autoimmune disease under the sun. It ended up being diagnosed as chronic Lyme later on. But in this journey along that way, I got into wellness. And so fasting was, oh gosh, it was the epitome of the things. And so I joined this course, I won't name it, by a well-known wellness person. And it was how long did it last? It was an 8-week gut health reset, because gut health was sort of touted as it encompassed all the people who were in this group and going through this process of coming from all different places, like chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, chronic Lyme, all these things. And there was a protocol that they would take us through, very, very structured, very intentional. I felt it was well researched, right? And during the course of those 8 weeks, we had to fast for a 4-day period twice. And that was the longest fast that I ever did. And during it, we were allowed tea, these special teas that we had to make, and bone broth. And I think on like one of the days you could have this thing called Beeler's broth. Which was supposed to be this healing thing. Anyway, so So I fasted for these 4 days several times. And I remember that by the night of day 2, I felt so clear. Like I felt so high almost, but in this way that wasn't my anxiety. It was like a calm high. I felt so energetic and I felt motivated and I had this energy to me. So there is this element of that. And I've had clients who have come to me, and one in particular is resonant, I'm remembering her now. She came to me and she had the previous month been on a retreat where they had fasted for a week, but the whole idea was to reach this nirvana. And after she got home, she ate. I mean, the binges were like unprecedented for her, and she landed like 3 weeks later. We were in a discovery call, and she said the thing is, though, Stephanie, that week was. I've never felt so good. You know what I mean? Like I really do feel, and that is what this is such a conflict, right? Like the fact that, like, number one, the health claims that it espouses, and the ways in which, fasting is touted to be healing, but also the way it physically will make you feel. So it's becoming more just than the knowing. It's not just intellectual, it's embodied sense of this is what I'm looking for. And then there's this idea that the breakdown of this is our fault. You know what I mean? Like this is our loss of willpower. And if we could just, it's the same as the diet, if we could just hold on to this, how good we would feel. And we have evidence of it. But, what actually goes on. And I think it's worth talking about the difference between people who are doing this successfully, quote unquote, and who are not coming home and binging and regaining all of the weight that they have lost and then some, which is what I hear all the time. But why, for a binge eater or with someone with disordered eating, why is fasting so much harder than it might be for example, someone's partner, especially males, right? Like where that seems so much easier. That piece was always the elusive, like that was the part I was never counting in. And that was the part I had to factor in order to move beyond this idea that was going to be a helpful thing for me.
Well, I think, you and I are probably going to be talking about it over this episode. There was a psychological element to me whereby if I managed to get into a fast, I was really excited about being able to do that, because the initial start is the hardest part. And then I would hit a place where I felt okay, and I remember I would feel like I would never need to eat food again.
Yeah.
Was never need to eat food again. And then I'd be scared. At some point, normally, when I broke it, there was like this fear that came from somewhere in me that I could do this forever, and that wouldn't be, like knowing that the consequences of never eating again are not good. Even the wellness people would say that much. That there was something in me that was just like, no, like I can't, like this is dangerous. Because the motivation behind it, I think, is part of it as well. I think there's a biological element for some people. Like I think our biologies respond different, but the psychological part and the reason behind it, I wasn't going into a fast going, I don't know, it was never going in from this calm, peaceful. It didn't come from this intuition inside me that was going, this is the thing that I need to do. It was coming from like fear and desperation and this desire to fix myself. So there was almost like this the tightening state. Going into it from that state is very different to perhaps how other people's psychology might be different around that. And we've got brains that anticipate, and they're always trying to predict. And when there's been food chaos anyway, because there's been so many attempts to diet, like
right.
all of that is stored in your brain,
yes.
and in your nervous system, in the primal part of your brain, in your psychology, in your emotional
Yes.
responses. And there's so many layers to it that makes it much more complex.
That's it to me. So I have this memory. I'm actually trying to work this out in somatic therapy right now. I feel like this is an important thing. So I have this memory when I was 16 years old of, this is the first time that I started restricting to the degree that it was, really a big deal. I mean, never mind. It was always a big deal. It's just that this was more of the extreme. And I was counting my calories at this time, and I was under eating, absolutely. And I was also exercising a whole bunch. And so I remember going to bed and being really hungry. I remember having dreams that I had eaten so much, and I would wake up in the night and feel like I'd eaten, and, like, oh yeah, I didn't. And then I would wake up and go running and go swimming before I would go to work with my dad this one summer. And then I would go to field hockey, and I remember I have this memory of walking into my bathroom to take a shower after a field hockey practice. And I remember that I like blacked out a little bit. Like I just turning on the shower, I have this memory of turning on the shower and feeling the water with my hand and having to lean against the doorway and put my hand in the water. And I remember if I opened my eyes or if I moved, I was going to fall. And I just had to stand there and wait for that, like, to pass. And it took a while. And then I would get in the shower, and that happened a lot. And I remember it started to become this thing where if it didn't happen, I thought I'd eaten too much. Mm-hmm. So it was like, but I remember being terrified of it. So there was a part of me that was like, oh my God, like I'm going to fall down. Like I'm blacking out. And there's a part of me that was like, yes. And I went with that. But that fear is still inside of me. And I think that like what that was coding, I think at the time was like some kind of physical trauma, right? Like that the body was like, you are not okay. Like we are not getting enough food. Like there's a survival issue here. And I think that in that moment, because it's so clear to me and because it comes up for me a lot, like I think about it a lot, that feeling is exactly what comes up if I now were to think about dieting. It's the same thing. There's something that got imprinted at that time. And I recognize that my story is a bit extreme and that not everybody dieted or restricted to that degree, but I know some people did here that listening. But I think that even a diet, even like a sustained amount of dieting can be imprinted with this fear. Like in the body, it's not necessarily mental. And maybe to your mental mind, it would have been great that you were losing weight and not having enough calories and waking up hungry. But there's something in the body that overrides that. That's your higher brain thinking. There's a lower brain part that's like, uh-oh, and it gets scared. And I think that once you've coded that in the same way all trauma works, theoretically, that's remembered. And that's why I think that somebody like my husband, if he were to fast, would not have that necessarily come up. Whereas when I fast for blood work, I've mentioned this before, that fear returns. I feel it. My body's like, uh-oh. And I get into this place. And even though my mind is like, we're good, we're recovered. Like this is not a threat. We just have to fast for some blood work and then we'll go home and have breakfast. There's a part of my body that starts to rev up and I can feel it. And I associate it so much with that moment in the shower. And I think that this is a really, really important piece for understanding why, yes, even if you could prove that even if we knew for certain that fasting created some kind of wellness benefit, that there was something wonderful to come of it, that might be true. But if you've got this coded trauma, there will be a retribution and there will be some kind of fighting back that eventually occurs, even if it is psychological, even if I think it would be biological and physiological, but it would also there'd be a psychological fear that does come up. And I work hard at, like, I talk about, the calming of the system. And this is deeper. This is something that I can't even quite access in all the work I've done around this. Like I'm trying to work this out in therapy, that in a somatic therapy setting of like really getting to something very, very deep and encoded to help calm that down, because it's just, the body knows exactly what it's doing. And it's like, this is a threat out there. I'm going to protect against it.
I agree 100%. I also want to speak to the people who haven't restricted to that point where they feel the dizziness you talk about. We know that when you restrict food to that degree, you can feel lightheaded, you can black out, all those kinds of things. We're using the word trauma here, right? Like that was traumatizing to your nervous system. And I know you agree with this anyway, but for people who might see themselves as never quite fitting a criteria of an eating disorder, they're in and out of diets, in and out of diets, in and out of diets. And so it's more this sort of low level chaos around food, but it's built up over the years. Like that is the pattern and it's ingrained, and the body the mind doesn't trust that you're going to feed it in a consistent way. It doesn't know when food's coming. So then the idea of fasting can trigger the same mechanism that you're talking about.
Right.
But I just wanted to say that even if someone's experience is less extreme than that,
right,
that this exactly can still be going on in you. If you would like to come and connect with us in person, we're going to be in Dublin on Saturday the 16th of September 2023. We're going to be teaming up with the Intuitive Eating Hub for a workshop followed by a social at a local Irish pub. We would love to meet you and hope you can join us.
And don't forget, you can still join our community of listeners by signing up on Patreon for access to monthly support calls, an active private Facebook group, and regular Ask Us Anything bonus calls. Links for Dublin and for the community are in the show notes.
Have you heard of Michael Mosley?
No.
Okay. I think probably every single one of my UK listeners will know who this person is. It's Dr. Michael Mosley. So this guy, Michael Mosley, how long ago now? I don't know, 6, 7 years ago, maybe a little bit longer. He does this documentary series where he looks into fasting and the potential benefits of fasting, and does all the people are having physicals and showing that this is changing in their blood and this is changing in their blood. This is positive, like IGF-1's reducing, growth hormones
Yes.
increasing, like all of this kind of stuff. And he was playing around with it, and he developed what's called the 5-2 diet in the UK. So it's 5 days of eating whatever you want, however you want, just whatever that might be. And then 2 days, they're called fast days, but if you are in a female body, you can have 500 calories. If you're in a male body, you can have 600 calories.
Mm-hmm.
So it's fasting. And the claim was that it offers the same benefits, but it's not the same psychological thing of not eating anything throughout the day. This was huge in the UK at the time. And now he's come up with another one called the 800 fast diet, based on this information out there where you can just eat 800 calories a day and that will reverse blood sugar issues and like all these different benefits as well. And it was so appealing. And I think one of the reasons why it's so appealing when you struggle with food is because for me, it always felt easier to not start eating than to have to stop. That's the big appeal. That's where the black and white thinking, I think, comes in. And I mean, so I know so many people who were doing the 5-2 at the time. And it was supposed to be a way of life. Like you just do this for the rest of your life for the health benefits and potential weight loss. Lots of people at the time going, this is amazing. And I don't know a single person that still does it now. It was definitely one of these fads that came and went. Did you have anything similar to that in the US?
Sure. The 5-2, the 16-8. I mean, there's all different ways of doing it. And then the name that I always think about with fasting is Jason Fung. So he's an endocrinologist and he talks about it from the lens of diabetes. And I think he was the one where I learned about it and learned about all the different types of it. There's another name. Do you know Dr. Peter Attia?
No.
So he was another one. And these are both all men we're talking about, actually. And Peter Attia had, I listened to his podcast episodes and, oh gosh, I think I just got on his train and he fasts for a week every season. And I was like, yes. And he, but he also has lots of diet culture undertones and his appearance is very important to him. And there's ego stuff going on that he admits. So I don't think it's as, I don't know if it's as pure and sincere as he made it sound, but I would follow them and I would try all their different types. For me, I felt like, first of all, I couldn't do the 500 thing. The 500 calorie thing, because it was so much easier for me to just do nothing than to have a little bit of something. The second I had a little bit of something, I opened the floodgates. And I think it for me feels like you're winding something up. And every time that I would fast, it would be like there was this denial of self that had to happen. Like the hunger had to be like a hard no. Like it was like no, and you would resist harder, and you feel like you'd wind that toy up tighter, and that had to be sustained in order to, because you get very hungry, and you're like, oh my gosh, and you have to tighten. And because of that, like when you let go, it's like boom, and it like you are so, the very thing that enables you to fast is the very thing that creates the intensity of the binge urge, the equal and opposite, but not even equal. The way that I would binge after a fast like that would be amounts that like I couldn't even imagine like how I fit it. You know what I mean? I couldn't believe how much food I could eat. And it wasn't the amount that I'd fasted. It wasn't the amount that I'd missed during a fast. It was like triple and quadruple that amount. Like it was so much food. And I feel like there's something about fasting in and of itself that creates such, it's black and white thinking to the nth degree, but I think it almost feels like a physiological black and white think. It's not just thinking to me. It's circumstances that necessitate black and white embodiedness. And then it, of course, goes in this other direction afterwards. But I never understood that. I always felt like that was all part of my gluttony. Like that was part of my own issue, my psychological issue. And I didn't respect it. I understood to a degree that I might need to eat more food, and people talked about that. But like, not to the degree that I did. I thought that was my issue. And I see the issue as such a biological defense. I don't know. I just have such compassion. It's like, of course that would happen. Yeah, of course that would happen. Like that's what's going to happen when you fast, when your body gets scared.
What do you make of 16/8? So 16/8 for anyone listening is the idea of just having shorter eating windows. So it might be that you have 8 hours a day and you would eat all your food or your meals within those 8 hours. The thinking often behind it is they'll say things like, well, it gives your digestion a rest. It gives opportunity for your body to regenerate, do its healing work. It's supposed to increase insulin sensitivity and make you more fat adaptable so that you can burn carbohydrates and fat more effectively. Like these are all the claims that are made over
Right.
something that sounds like quite a benign thing, right? Just have your breakfast a little later and have your dinner a little earlier. Discuss.
So I've tried that even after recovery. So after that first year, I recovered, and I think it was within the second or 2.5 years maybe after. And I was like, oh, like I want to let me see what it's like now to do that. And I remember that it was fine for a few days. And then I was like really hungry at 7:30 in the morning. And I was like, I'm really hungry. And then I noticed that I was like, yeah, but just wait. You know what I mean? And then I heard myself and I was like, like I'm fighting myself about my hunger and I'm pushing my hunger down. And that was one of my non-negotiables that I talk about in my gentle nutrition class, which actually was the impetus for me making that course later, when I kind of thought to myself, like, this is one of those things that when I start to cross that line, it's too slippery. It was too easy to get obsessed with it. And then I started looking at eating breakfast earlier in the morning as some kind of failing, or like I'd done something wrong.
How dare you?
And so I was like, this isn't healthy for me. At that time, I still was susceptible to this feeling that I had said, like, I'm not compromising anything anymore. Plus the fact that I didn't feel a difference. So I don't know if it would be different if I had some kind of blood work that got, it was like, oh, your A1C is not my thing anyway. So I have good A1C whether I'm fasting or not. But if I had like a thyroid number, which has been a thing in my past when I was in eating disorder, like if that started to get better or something like that, and I was like, okay, I don't know if it would feel different, but to me, there was never a known benefit that, so it felt to me so arbitrary. And then it felt like just part of like, then why am I doing this? Is this part of like a wellness culture idea? Am I looking to control something? So it's like, this isn't worth it to me. Now, if this sort of speaks to the idea of when people talk about not eating things for food intolerances and sensitivities, to me, that's a hard thing to speak about because I don't have any. So I can't accurately put myself in that position. But, for me, it feels like if I can't feel that there's a real reason for this, then why am I doing it? You know what I mean? It seems like then it's slipping into something that's more about my own sense of control or ego or something. So I just don't go there. Mm-hmm. Have you ever felt a benefit of doing something like that? Or do you know a benefit of that for yourself personally?
I've tried the eating window. For me, like physically, I feel like it was okay for me. My memory of it was physically it was okay. But mentally, like when I start putting the rules, I want to push the rules anyway. Like that's just my personality. Like you can't tell me that because it's 6 p.m. I'm not allowed to eat anything from now on. I'll show you. Like, regardless of whether I'm hungry or not. Like there's such a mental, which feels much more in my mind than in my body. I feel like my body is pretty tolerant to, if I had to, for example, if I had to go and fast, or let's say I was having surgery and I wasn't having my surgery till the afternoon and I wasn't able to eat anything all day, that would actually be fine. I think physically that would be fine. Yeah, there wouldn't be any panic.
Oh, wow.
Because I know what it's for.
Response.
Yeah, I know what it's for. I'm not feeling that. And so mentally it makes sense to me. I know the consequences of potentially eating something before surgery, not a good idea. So that feels okay. But I think my preference is to finish eating earlier anyway. That's just my preference. Mm-hmm. Like if I am at home and I'm making my own dinner, I'm having a 6 p.m. dinner. Mm-hmm. And then I'm probably done. It might be dinner, it might be a dessert. I might have something after dinner, but it would normally be straight after dinner. And then it's like, there's a sense of completeness for the day. It's not a rule that's going, right, that's it. I mustn't eat anything till tomorrow. But it's just like, I'm done. If I went to bed and it was 11 p.m. and I couldn't sleep and I was feeling a bit hungry or I would get up and
Right.
eat something. That would be
Right.
okay. That happens about once every other month.
What a specific time frame.
I know. I feel like it's about
Once every other month, I wake up at 11 and have to have something to eat.
or in the night. So some reason, like in the night, I feel hungry in bed. And
Yes.
maybe once it's
Yes.
happened. It's happened actually saying it's happened twice in New York, which is no, that's more than I said. It happened twice in New York, where I've had to get up, and go and get something to eat.
That's happened to me. We've talked about
And
that.
yeah,
And we
and
want
that
the
to
peanut
me,
butter.
yeah, and that to me, or for me, it's always cheese sandwich and a banana, which was exactly what I had here as well. To be fair, I didn't have a lot of options. So for me, it's something about does it make sense? And I don't tend to have breakfast that early either, unless I just happen to need to because of my schedule. Let's say, I don't know, if my first client was at 10 a.m., chances are I probably wouldn't get to breakfast till nearly 9. But if my first client was at 9 or earlier, then I would just have my breakfast earlier. And I think I said this once before, but I think we cut it out. So I don't know why I'm saying it again because I'll probably just cut it out anyway. But when I record my YouTube video, I normally do it on a Thursday morning and I don't eat until after I've done my YouTube video. So that's often not till about 11 a.m. on a Thursday. Am I having breakfast? And that is because I like to drink a coffee on an empty stomach. I like that caffeine hit. There's something about like that particular mental state that feels really clear. So so I kind of know that every Thursday, and it's not, I'm trying to think what would happen if I woke up on a Thursday and I felt really hungry, but I don't know that I ever do feel that kind of hunger in the morning. Would be more likely to feel that, I say paradoxically, but I actually think a few people can relate to this, if I eat late. So if I have a late meal and I go to bed and I wake up, it's almost like I feel like, that my body hasn't gone into the so-called fasted state that you go in overnight. It's like having an 8-hour gap in the day between breakfast and dinner would be really uncomfortable for me. Like I would be hungry. It's that kind of feeling, which is probably why I say that I physically feel better if I finish eating sooner and if I don't necessarily eat like the minute I get up. And I think I used to have breakfast the minute I got up pre-disordered eating days. But since being on thyroxine, you're not supposed to eat for an hour after taking it in the morning. So that got me out of the habit. I take medication that I'm supposed to. If I had it and I ate 10 minutes later because I needed to, I wouldn't think twice about it. But I'm like, that's the ideal. So that is what I do 99.5% of the time.
Well, I think it's about just like not pushing your body beyond its limits, right? So you can feel when you're doing that. And so for me, like this morning, we're recording this, it's 9:52 in the morning. I woke up this morning at 6:30 and by 7:10, I was like, "Ooh, I'm hungry." And typically what I like to do, what's more convenient for me, is that I get the kids on the bus, I take a shower, and then before my first client, it happens later in my morning. And that's typically my body's good with that, and that's fine. But this morning, and there are mornings like this where my body's like knocking earlier, and it's like, if you do that, you're pushing it. There's something in me that's like, don't do that. Like it would take more effort for me to wait than it would to just have something. And when that happens, that's for me like a flag. There's something about not pushing my body past what it's signaling to me that I honor, even if it goes against my routine or practicality. You know what I mean? Like it just is something that's, that I know that gets tricky for me. But most mornings I end up, I suppose I do fast a little bit. And I do eat dinner early because my body's okay with that. And so it doesn't bother me to just wait. And then so I wait. There's just such a difference between when you're doing something on purpose and you're denying signals. That's the place where we're getting into, I think, or what would be getting into a disorder. There's something going on that was not going to take me down a good path.
Well, I think many people are just not trusting their own experience. They might wake up and at 7:10, like you, feel hungry and go, well, no, I shouldn't be hungry. Like I shouldn't be hungry now. Like, and there's that resistance against that. I think it's important to keep naming the difference between like hunger and appetite. Hunger for me is much more, I'm quite comfortable with hunger. It doesn't stress me out. But then there's appetite that's different, like appetite being that drive and that desire to eat. And sometimes hunger and appetite coexist. And sometimes they happen in isolation of each other as well. So it's like in the fasted state, hunger dials down. And I think often appetite dials down as well. But then, like you said, you use the word opening the floodgates. once we eat, we call them appetizers, right? It's like it stimulates the appetite, that first thing.
Yes.
So quite often I'd be breaking a fast with like an apple or something. I'm just gonna have an apple and then I'm gonna like leave it for a bit and then I'm gonna have something else. But like the minute I had an apple, it
Yes.
would be like, oh, what else could I have? And then
Yes.
I'd be like, oh well, maybe if I have like a granola bar or something, that's not too much. And then the
Yes.
mind's going, and I have just fasted, so like
Yes.
I've
All
earned a
that.
load, like all of that storage thing, and then it's that, and then it's like then the appetite is still ramping up, and then the mind's going, okay, what else could I have? And then at some point, it's like, I've blown it.
Yes.
I knew I could never do it. I'm a
Keep
failure.
going.
I'm
I'll
just
just
gonna eat
fast again
everything.
tomorrow.
Yeah, I'll eat everything and I'll get back on it tomorrow. Yes.
That was a big one for me, by the way. So when I would blow it in some way, my antidote was, well, I'm going to fast tomorrow then. Like that's how because that was such a soother. It was like, okay, then I don't have to feel guilty right now because I'm going to make up for this tomorrow. And that helped. It actually almost like helped me not further binge because I was like, oh, then I don't feel guilty anymore. So I'm not running away from anything. Or it actually made me binge way more because it was like, oh, I got to fill up today because, there's such a psychological element going on here too that you cannot, I think we're so quick to discount the psychological elements because it feels like we should be able to fix that or control that. And it feels changeable, whereas the physiology doesn't. But I think the psychology is like I've said this before too. It's more powerful than we're giving it credit for. There's so many psychological processes going on here about reward and what we deserve and what we're going to do later and and the discomfort with our own appetite and yeah, it's tricky.
So what are your thoughts then? So this is a common one. So someone has binged a lot one evening, maybe gone to bed feeling quite unwell. They wake up in the morning just feeling horrible. Their stomach feels horrible from the food that they've had. And there's no part of them that wants to eat breakfast. The body's going, no, we don't want anything. The mind's going, no, I don't want to eat anything. What are your thoughts on that situation, that moment?
It depends who you are and where you are in the process of all of this. So let's say that happened to me. Let's say that I went out to dinner. This happens sometimes where I'll eat like a lot of food at, going out to dinner or something and overfill. And then the next day I'm like, ooh, I'll wait. Yeah, I'll absolutely. Yeah, I'm not going to have breakfast at a time like that. However, if I was in the first year of that recovery where I was still healing from a restrictive mindset as well, I would have it anyway. So there's something about the anchor meals to recover. That was important to me because if I didn't, I would then get on the train of, oh, how far can I push this? And oh, I feel, yeah, and that's too slippery. So for me, the reliability of meals, no matter what had come the day before, was way more important. That was so foundational for me to understand that there was a rhythm to my food that came no matter what. There were no exceptions and there was no opportunity to take advantage and manipulate that. And I think this is different if you're someone who actively restricts versus doesn't. You know what I mean? Like I think that it could be helpful to wait and to have the body's cues initiate the eating when restriction's not something that is going on for you. So I think it really does depend on what your disorder looks like and the stage of the process that you're in.
Yeah, because I think I spoke about it in some of our earlier podcasts. That was something that I did. I would wait and I'd be like, okay, I'm just going to wait for that first flutter of hunger. But I would say I was someone who could still feel hungry. That some people are so out of touch, or their bodies are feeling so dysregulated, those hunger cues just aren't coming. And then you could end up going a whole day being like, well, I never felt hungry. Evening time comes, you start eating, your appetite is stoked.
Right.
And then the binging starts. The other thing that I think really helped me with the next day after binging was recognizing that the first time I eat the next day, it's going to be uncomfortable and I'm probably not going to feel satisfied. It was just the case. Because if I'd binged the day before and my body is trying to recover and get back into homeostasis after the binge, whether I ate breakfast or whether the first thing I ate at lunchtime, it wasn't enjoyable. It didn't taste good. And I would always have that feeling of dissatisfaction. But when I started to anticipate that and I knew that was coming, because that was such a trigger for a binge, not feeling satisfied, I would eat something and I would be like, oh, like that doesn't feel right. I'm trying to find the thing that I need to eat to make myself feel better. But actually, food can't make me feel better in that moment because my body is still adjusting to having consumed a lot of food. But it was like the getting out ahead and going like, okay, I know that, all right, I'm going to have breakfast or I'm going to eat now and I'm probably going to feel uncomfortable afterwards. I'm probably going to feel dissatisfied. That's okay. When I'm ready for it and that feeling came, I could learn to tolerate that feeling. And then normally by the next day, food started to feel okay again. And this was particularly how I was like, in the sort of semi-recovered state where I'd be having a binge and then I would get myself back into balance for a bit and then I might have a binge and it was learning how to get myself into balance. And this was one of the things that was fundamental in being able to get myself into balance and not one binge turning into days, weeks, and months of binging.
Yeah. The other part coming up as you're talking is like when you've binged and then the next day you're having a meal that's not satisfying. It also there's also something you're not getting the reward of, when you're hungry and you eat something and you're full. There's like almost like an inherent reward in that whole process of like hunger being met. It's like fullness meets fullness. And it's not as rewarding. And then it starts to associate with like there's just an associated psychological feeling of being full upon full. That used to actually create a binge situation for me where I would eat and be like, oh, this whole thing feels like remnants of yesterday. And then I would just keep going because there was no sense of something. And to that end, I want to say that I think this sort of speaks to your last question, but there is an inherent benefit of waiting and of having the body feel ready to eat again so that you do get that sort of back and forth communication going on again. There is a reward to that. And I think that that can be really helpful for people beyond the stage where you're trying to establish that consistency itself from a restriction point of view. But you have to be careful with it because it can turn into this other thing. So like knowing where you are and how much you trust your body and how much you trust yourself and how much you can feel the cues, that matters. And so that's why there's not like a one size fits all. And I wouldn't say that fasting in and of itself doesn't have a place in certain places, but it's so tricky when you're talking about somebody with disordered eating or eating disorders that you can't rule that out. You can't look at it at face value. It's got to be considered within the lens of what else is alive in your disorder that has to be factored in.
Again, the idea of where you are in your recovery, because for some people, there's that cycle that you can get into whereby you binge. So then you don't eat enough during the day the next day, which is then setting you up for the binge in the evening. So you don't eat enough during the next day. So I think it's also looking back at what your patterns are. If you know that that's a pattern that you can get into, then maybe you're somebody who would benefit from ensuring that you're eating more earlier on, because we start to notice patterns. And it's amazing how when you're in it, you don't see the pattern like that, trying to zoom out over the weeks and months. I mean, I was going around the same thing over and over again and I didn't see it.
Yeah.
Well, I kind of did.
Because you don't want to. You don't want to either. Yeah. It's like, no. Anywho, so I hope this wasn't one of those episodes where you're like, thank you for all those ideas that I didn't know before. I'm going to go use them for my disorder. Like when I would listen to, be like, oh, what name was that you mentioned? Who should I be following?
Yeah, I thought that when you were saying the names, I was like, people might be Googling now. Jason Fung.
Yeah, well, I think everybody who's ever heard of fasting knows it's probably about him, but.
Yeah, or maybe someone hasn't heard of fasting. We just educated them.
That's what I'm saying.
They're going to go and try it. This is why it's difficult to talk about.
You'll just
end
up back here.
Yeah,
you'll just end up back here.
Yeah. The conclusion of the episode is don't do it.
Don't do it if you've got this history. If you're listening to this podcast, it's for a reason. Yeah. All right. Ta-ta for now.
Ta-ta for now.
Superb. I'm gonna go pee.